we have been discussing about early Greek philosophers, and we had moved on to the later Greek philosopher Epicurus and Democritus under atomism. We will be continuing more of Epicurus in our today's lecture. The first lecture of Epicurus has already been discussed in our last session, and we continue with Epicurus part 2 today. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Now, Epicurus, the question that should be striking us all is, how did he turn physics, which is his atoms plus void, into a practical cure for the central human ills such as fear, anxiety and bad choices? So how does Epicurus turns physics to heal or to annihilate the existential crisis of human lives? This is where our focus would be today. The therapeutic goal, the bigger picture. For Epicurus, philosophy is not abstract ornament. Its point is to remove the mental and bodily disturbances that make life miserable. Physics or atomism for Epicurus is a means to that end. By explaining the world naturally, it dissolves the fears that trouble us, which is the fear of gods, fear of death, fear of random catastrophe, and clears the ground for a tranquil life, the ataraxia, and freedom from bodily pain, aponia. Also, the metaphysical toolkit that makes this therapy possible for Epicurus has been the combination of atoms plus void. He says that everything means everything, which is the bodies, the mind, the sensations, is composed of atoms moving in the void. There is no supernatural machinery that intervenes in nature. The mortal soul for him is the soul is material and perishes with the body, with no consciousness after life to fear. And thus he includes the concept of the clinamen, which is the swerve, S-W-E-R-V-E, which is a tiny intermediate deviation in atomic motion Epicurus adopts from earlier atomists to allow for moral responsibility and not strict determinism. These metaphysical claims undercut the two biggest sources of existential terror, which is punitive gods and eternal punishment. Further, epistemology as a practical test, sensations and truth. Epicurus treats sensations as the starting point and criterion for truth. Our sense impressions are reliable data. Error arises from mistaken judgments about them. This gives a simple therapeutic method, which is, the correct false judgments, like that will harm me, gods will punish me, by comparing them to clear facts about nature. So Epicurus was not really happy with such fears that existed in humans, and he says that one ought to have a practical test to all these existential angst. About ethics, for Epicurus, pleasure has been redefined as freedom from disturbance. Pleasure is the highest good, but not hedonism as binging. Epicurus distinguishes kinetic pleasures and static pleasures. He also talks about ataraxia and aponia. Ataraxia for him is the tranquility of the mind. Aponia for him is the freedom from bodily pain. Kinetic pleasures, he had mentioned those as active pleasures arising from actions, and static pleasures as the state of absence of pain and disturbance. He had also talked about the tetrapharmakos, which is the four-part cure, and Epicurus famously summed his therapeutic programs in the remedies of number 1, don't fear the gods, number 2, don't fear death, and he also says that what is good is easy to get and what is terrible is easy to endure. Also about the practical therapeutic method, one has to go through the diagnosis and the correction habit, where Epicurean therapy works like this. That is, diagnose the disturbance, identify the fear or judgment causing anxiety, then explain it away with natural knowledge. Show how atoms, mortality of the soul, and the nature of the gods remove the justification of the fear. Further, he talks about prescribed lifestyle adjustments, which is to reduce unnecessary desires, cultivate simple satisfactions, prefer stable pleasures, and so on. And he talks about rehearse and habituate, which is repeated philosophical reflection like meditating on morality, practicing prudent choice builds habits that maintain ataraxia. So he says that fear of death, fear of gods, desire management ought to be the outlook of a moral person. And Epicurus didn't really prescribe solitary asceticism. He placed friendship at the core of a good life. Friends provide security, shared pleasure, and mutual counsel. His school, which is the garden, functioned as a community where philosophical therapy was practiced together. He also had talked about free will, clinic, and the clinamen or the swerve, which is philosophically subtle. The swerve, SWERVE, introduces a small indeterminacy into atomic motion, so human action is not simply the predictable product of prior atoms. Scholars did debate whether Epicurus meant this literally or as a theoretical device. Functionally, it supports the therapeutic aim by preserving moral responsibility and agency, and as reiterated, the techniques and practices for the day-to-day life of happy gardening of his clinic. Epicurus had mentioned about philosophical conversation, which is to refute false beliefs, reflective exercises, which is contemplating death, to diffuse catastrophic imaginings, simplicity, a regimen, prudential calculus, and rituals reframed. And further about objects, limits, and the Epicureans, he replies that hedonism encourages excess. So Epicurus replies that true pleasure is to secure tranquility. Excess of anything often harms that end. So prudence and self-control are central. And he also adds that naturalism undermines morality. Epicureans maintain social rules and justice are instrumentally valuable. Justice secures mutual benefit and peace. And the scientific objections that atomism is ancient physics, its empirical correctness is a historical question, the therapeutic structure does not hinge on every atomistic detail but on the broader naturalistic diagnosis that removes superstition. So, the legacy of Epicurus's therapeutic model influenced Lucretius and later secular moral philosophy, and thus we see that Epicurus turns atomism into a hands-on therapy. Metaphysics provides the diagnosis where there is no punishing God, death is nothing, the world runs on natural law. Epistemology provides the diagnostic instrumental, which is sensations is correct judgments, and ethics provides the cure, which is prudent pursuit of stable pleasure, friendship, and simple living. And philosophy becomes a medicine for the soul, which is practical, communal, and designed to produce lasting tranquility. Now, with this quick revision of Epicurus, which we had done in our part 1, we are good to go with the second part of Epicurus now, where we will see how Epicurus has been the practical engineer of Democritus's blueprints. Now, Democritus' role, as we understand, has been the architect of the design, which is Democritus had built the structural model of reality with atoms plus void as the ultimate building blocks. Eternal motion was governed, according to Democritus, by strict necessity or the concept of determinism. He had said, Democritus had said that no supernatural forces directing nature, and soul is material and perishes with the body. And he says that this is schematic. It describes how the world is put together but does not directly tell you how to live inside it. Now think of it like an architect's blueprint for building. You can see the walls, the supports, the spaces, but no furniture, no plumbing, no instructions for comfort. And this is where we see the connect of Epicurus's role as the practical designer in the PPT shared here. The blueprint element from Democritus is the deterministic atomic motion. Epicurus's engineering adjustment has been to add swerve or clinamen, and the purpose of this was to make space for free will, moral responsibility and personal agency, which is nothing but the comfort, which is the furniture, the plumbing and so on. The blueprint element from Democritus that Epicurus had picked up was the deterministic atomic motion. Further, about the material soul of Democritus, Epicurus's engineering adjustment has been emphasized the morality of the soul to dispel fear of afterlife, and the purpose has been that it removes anxiety about eternal punishment. And the blueprint element from Democritus that he had picked up was the material soul. Similarly, about the blueprint element from Democritus, the naturalistic gods, if any, Epicurus's engineering adjustment has been to recast gods as blissful and non-interfering and not as fearful. And this purpose was to neutralize fear of divine wrath without denying their existential outright. And thus the blueprint element from Democritus was the naturalistic gods. Further, about the natural law explanation, Epicurus engineered the adjustment by applying it to human psychology and desires, and the purpose of human benefit helps identify and limit unnecessary desires. The blueprint element of Democritus was the natural law explanation. Now, one of the most important reason why Epicurus has been the practical engineer was through the cheerfulness element through understanding nature, where Epicurus made it systematic by talking about ataraxia, which is peace of mind, and aponia, freedom from bodily pain, as the final god. And the purpose was that it had turned a vague ethical idea into a clear life strategy. Thus, the blueprint element from Democritus has been cheerfulness through understanding nature. So, we see that Democritus gave us a cosmic floor plan. Epicurus fitted it out of habitation. He installed the fear removal systems. No fear of gods, no fear of death. He added desire regulation devices. He categorized desires into natural and necessary. Natural also, but unnecessary and vain, and fulfilling only the first reliably. And he had built social safety features, that is friendship as an emotional anchor, and designed mental climate control, that is the tetramorphos, as a toolkit to maintain the psychological tranquility. Now, this is what makes Epicurus an engineer. For an engineer's job is to take abstract principles and build usable human-centered systems. Epicurus did exactly this. He converted natural philosophy into a therapeutic technology, a kind of soul engineering. This device he produced was not just a doctrine but a lifestyle. The garden, which was daily a philosophical reflection and structured desire management. Thus, the end result in Democritus here, where he would say that, quote, "Here is how the cosmos works," unquote, Epicurus made it better by putting across the statement, which is, quote, "Given that this is how the cosmos works, here's how you can live without fear, with stable pleasure and in harmony with nature," unquote. So, Epicurus did not discard the Democritian framework. He refined it into a personal survival and flourishing kit. So, Epicurus turned a physical theory of atoms plus void into an integrated practical system that ties metaphysics, epistemology, therapy, ethics to social practice. That move is his central intersectional innovation. Each piece supports the others, so philosophy functions as medicine for life. So, if we are now to see the intersectional insights, we see number one, naturalism as therapeutic foundation. What it does is it uses a naturalistic ontology where there is no supernatural agents intervening to dissolve existential fears, that is, divine punishment, mysterious fate. Metaphysics directly proposes psychological therapy. However, the critical note here is powerful secularizing move, but it ties the therapy's authority to metaphysical claims. If one rejects the particular metaphysical story, the therapeutic aim can still be reached by other secular arguments, but Epicurus's original package is metaphysically loaded. And about sensation-centered epistemology as a clinical method, what it does was to treat sensations as primary evidence and locate error in judgment, not raw perception. This creates a simple diagnostic model to identify false judgments, correct them, and relieve anxiety. Thus, the critical note is elegant and practice-oriented, but the account struggles with perceptual error and hallucination. If sensations can mislead the boundary between sensation is true and judgment is false, it needs more explanation than Epicurus gives. And about the clinamen or the swerve, metaphysics for agency, what it does is it introduces a tiny interdeterminacy to break strict causal change, so moral agency and responsibility are possible. This is a reliable metaphysical tweak to secure ethical practice. Thus, the critical note, the much debated, is the randomness by itself does not explain responsible agency. Critics ask how mere atomic hiccups produce unfiltered, purposeful action. The clinamen may buy room against fatalism, but arguably it fails to provide a robust account of moral authorship. And about the hedonism, which was revised into prudential therapeutic hedonism, what Epicurus did was that he had said that pleasure being the supreme good, but it should be reinterpreted as absence of pain or disturbance, ataraxia or aponia. This refines momentary pleasure into a long-run prudential calculus, which is choose actions that secure stable tranquility. The criticism, however, is that the strong against the caricatures of invite every excess is something to be mulled over. Critics charge that defining the good solely in terms of pleasure, even refined pleasure, may ignore other intrinsic values, example integrity, justice, or undervalue duties that do not obviously maximize pleasure. Further about virtue instrumentalized, what it does was prudence, justice, temperance were not ultimate ends, but reliable means to ataraxia. Virtues become instrumental technologies for well-being. The criticism here is that it is a practical concept but vulnerable. If virtues are also instrumentally valuable, what compels virtuous behavior when short-term gains tempt betrayal? Epicurus' social mechanism, which was reputation, friendship, help, but this remains a normative thinness compared with virtue ethics that treat virtue as intrinsically good. Now about the justice as convention or mutual advantage, the proto-contractualism, what it does was justice as a social agreement to avoid mutual harm and secure peaceful coexistence, ethical political norms grounded in practical utility rather than metaphysical moral facts. The criticism has been that it is a clear-minded and pragmatic, yet it risks being too permissive. If justice is merely instrumental, then when conditions change, the moral bindings of rules looks conditional. The Epicureans replied that moral stability secures peace, so convention persists. Still, questions about rights and resting systematic injustice are hard to handle within this toolkit. Now about friendship and communal therapy, the garden as clinic. What it was doing was, in Epicurean's philosophy, friendship was considered central to human flourishing. Ethical life is embedded in small communities that provide security, mutual aid, and philosophical practice. Philosophy is a social medicine, not only private reflection. And the criticism was that this is a rich human contribution, but critics note a tension. The recommended withdrawal from politics plus focus on close circles could enable indifference to larger injustices that require public action. Now, about the therapeutic pedagogy of philosophy as a disciplined practice. Here what it was doing in Epicurus's philosophy was prescription or tetrapharmakos, habit formation, dialogue and communal reinforcement. Now, Epicureanism functions like a regimen or therapy program, not just an abstract doctrine. The critical note here is that it is highly actionable and psychologically literate for its time. Yet, its success depends on the social setting, which is the garden, and personal temperament. It may be less scalable as public policy or for mass therapy. Now, about reframing theology to neutralize fear, what it was doing was to keep gods, to avoid impiety, but reconstitutes them as non-intervening exemplars of tranquility. This did remove the divine sanctions as a source of fear while retaining religious language. The criticism was that it was canny and strategic, but arguably a rhetorical move rather than a theological system with persuasive force for devout believers. It also removes a source of communal moral motivation in societies where religious sanctions matters. So, at the best, we can say that the Epicurus' philosophy is an early cognitive model. It is a precursor to therapeutic cognition, and it did identify distorted beliefs, leading to correcting them by appealing to nature and reason, changing affective states. And this anticipates modern cognitive therapies. However, analogy is useful, but it is limited, and the modern CBT or the cognitive broad theory relies on empirical psychology and controlled techniques. Epicurean methods are largely philosophical and communal, not empirically tested therapies. So, we see that the broader critical themes, the strength has been a systematic unity, where Epicurus is rare in ancient Greek philosophy, thought for fusing metaphysics, epistemology, ethics and social practice into a unified, practicable system aimed at human well-being. That makes his philosophy usually action guiding. However, the weakness is the dependency on contested metaphysics, which is the therapeutic package. It leans on atomism and the clinamen, historical or empirical rejection of those claims that doesn't collapse the ethical core, but it does remove some of the justificatory rhetoric Epicurus uses to dismantle religious fear. And also we see the weakness of the political modesty, which can be moral conservatism, where Epicurus' counsel to leave unnoticed and prioritize intimate friendship provides individual flourishing, but can be criticized for undercutting collective responses to oppression. And thus the ambiguity over agency, the clinamen or the swerve, attempts to reconcile freedom with naturalism, but opens hard questions like, is freedom meaningful if grounded in randomness? And modern compatibilist frameworks are probably more satisfying. Thus the practical modern relevance, even if science moved on from ancient atomism, the therapeutic architecture, which is correcting false beliefs, minimizing unnecessary desires, emphasizing social support, remains strikingly relevant. The analogy to cognitive therapy and interest in secular spiritualities shows Epicurus' continuing influence. Thus, Epicurus' major contribution beyond atomism is methodological and institutional. He redesigns a metaphysical theory into a practice-oriented life technique that links what we believe about the world to how we feel and act it. And as such, the intersection of metaphysics with epistemology, with ethics and community is philosophically, creative and therapeutically potent, but it also brings trade-offs, tensions about political responsibility, challenges for grounding agency and reliance on contested physical claims. So this has been about Epicurus so far in both part 1 and part 2. Thank you for being there. Thank you so much.